Analysts yesterday were very optimistic about the bourse, start of a new week. What's the movement on the bourse like today?
Well, the gains that started on Friday continued today. The increase was, however, not as significant as yesterday's. We started to see some softness. For the last few days, a lot of the interest has really been in the banking sector, of course, as investors react positively to the conclusion of the CBN audits. What we appear to be seeing is a bit of a rotation away from some of the banks that had originally been cleared and which had witnessed appreciation, with investors taking profits there and moving more into some of the newer banks that have just been cleared and which had been under pressure up until the time that the results of the audits were released. So we had the likes of Access Bank and Sky Bank closing up full points, but we saw softness in the likes of First Bank and Diamond Bank, which had been cleared during the first leg of the audit.
Why was the increase not as significant as yesterday?
Well, I mean, for one, there's a bit more profit taking on the cards now. A couple of the banks that saw some softness in their price movements have been increasing. I mean, if you put it in the context of the last sort of 3 weeks, there's a strong case for profit taking in those banks as investors just try to play the valuation story, really, and mop up some of the newer banks to be cleared at pretty attractive valuations. Also, there might be some concern ahead of what some investors expect to be the CBN name and shame program, basically, for debtors with non-performing loans, which some analysts expect to take place within the next couple of days. So there might still be a bit of apathy, and some investors might just be taking the opportunity to take some profit and sit on the sidelines and wait to see what the broader reactions are to that program.
Let's talk about the audit a little bit. Is the CBN treating the outcome of this audit differently to the last one?
Not necessarily. Of course, reactions to the initial one were much more severe because it came as an absolute surprise to almost everyone. In this case, I think the markets had, come to expect the results of the audit. In some quarters, the expectations were that the results would be more far-reaching than they were. So, in terms of preparedness, there's an obvious difference as regards investors and the broader public. But in terms of the CBN's actions, it's not a far cry from what prevailed initially.
But do you think that the overall cost of the banking reform is not greater somehow than the benefit it actually has to the economy right now?
Well, I mean, in the short term, of course, there's a huge cost to it. The CBN is having to pump in over 600 billion naira into those banks. And, many will argue that, it might not be the right application for such funds. The country is suffering from a lot of other issues, including infrastructure, dwindling fortunes for the manufacturing sector. But barring that, it has much more sort of long-term potential benefits. The financial sector plays a pivotal role in the functioning of, the Nigerian economy. And most of the other sectors will not be able to, perform without the intermediation role of the banks. So it's not so, whilst in the short term, there might be some challenges, there might be some concerns about the extent of the cost. In the long term, I think it will prove itself as beneficial.
What are your top picks in the banking sector this week?
Well, we think the sort of banks to look out for at the moment are banks with proven or relatively strong risk management processes, for one. Valuations will prove important as well as, we compare banks to each other. We're also looking for banks that, of course, on the back of stronger risk management, have not been required to make very significant provisioning as directed by the CBN, and also banks with the sort of brand perceptions that will attract deposits from sort of weaker banks to them. I mean, some of these banks, include the likes of Guarantee Trust Bank, Diamond Bank, where, there's obvious strength in the area of risk management and where the brands really stand out. And, you see them 10 years down the line definitely being strong players within the sector.
All right, and just before we go, give us an outlook for the Naira.
witnessed some pretty sharp gains last week. And the CBN was noted to have, commented on the strength as, not sort of being favorable and basically not wanting to allow the Naira to appreciate further. On the back of that, yesterday's interbank trading in the currency market was pretty weak. The Naira dropped. But what we're seeing is a lot more in terms of autonomous flows, especially from the oil majors who are pumping dollars in to buy Naira locally. And that should help the Naira maintain strength at current levels, of course, barring any significant intervention by the regulators.